This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Coragen Max insecticide from FMC. Get fast, selective, extended control of grasshoppers, Bertha armyworms, diamondback moth, and cutworms in a convenient, concentrated formulation. Coragen Max insecticide works alongside beneficials for a 1-2 punch that keeps the fight going long after you've left the field.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Today, we got the RealAg Issues Panel. We've got a great group of guests. We've got Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI. We've got Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith, both of RealAgriculture, and boy, do we have a lot of things to talk about. The budget will be one of the main focuses, what was in, what was out, and there was some changes regarding taxation that have a lot of you concerned. And so we've brought in today for a little bit of the show Ryan Kehrig. He is the national leader for agricultural tax with MNP based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. He's going to talk about some of the changes to the capital gains. He's also going to talk about a few other items as well, the exemption amount as well on the capital gains. So there's a lot of stuff to think about there. Big impacts potentially as it relates to farm succession. Are these changes good for the younger generation as the government has talked about? Or is there some maybe some unintended consequences as well? So we brought Ryan in as the heavy hitter, the tax specialist, to shed some light on what he sees. Okay, if you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. You know, one of the big things when I look at all of the details on the budget, and Kelvin Heppner of our team has done a great job of capturing a lot of the perspectives on the budget this week for RealAgriculture.com. One of the things that comes to mind is, or what's missing, is where in this budget, as you look at some of the impacts of some of the things that are rolled out, how does this increase Canada's competitiveness? How does this make Canada more productive? How does this make Canada really, really be able to grab hold of our economic drivers and push into more of a growth mindset? I don't see a lot of competition or competitiveness being really addressed in this budget. I don't mean to be harsh, but that was my first reaction as I started to read some of this. And it's not competition among, domestic, it's competition abroad. Canada compared to, say, the rest of the G7. For example, Canada is very much an exporting nation. We need to be competitive on the world stage. There's a lot of ways to be competitive. Access to labor, access to capital, we're competing. The capital flows around the world, so you got to compete for it. And I really wonder if the actual result is we're just getting less competitive. One of the things I'm going to ask our panel about. Hey, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to bring in the panel and break down the issues right after this.
If you have a growing list of questions about getting more from your fields, know that Koch Agronomic Services has an answer for every acre. With a full spectrum of nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement options, Koch Agronomic Services offers a deep portfolio of agronomically effective products. Each designed to enhance yield potential, all available to help solve your problems. Find the answer that's right for your acres. Start by visiting kochag.ca. That's KOCH ag.ca.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel here on this Friday. We got a lot to break down. A lot happened here this week. This segment's brought to you by the pre-emergent soil active herbicides Velterra EZ and Fierce EZ from New Farm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds. Spray after spring thaw for up to 8 weeks. 8 weeks of extended weed control this spring. Find out more by going to newfarm.ca. Okay, let's get to it here. We've got a special guest on our panel as well to talk about some of the tax changes that were presented in the budget. We'll get to that in a second. Up first, we've got, as usual, Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, great to have you back.
Well, thank you. Wonderful to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, well, we'll see how you perform this week, and we'll see if we have you back. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba. How are you doing?
Doing well here, too, and likewise, good to be here.
It's cold. This is what's with this weather?
Yeah, the ground outside here in southern Manitoba was white again this morning. So, yeah, bit of a return, but I'm expecting it won't last long. And any form of moisture is probably welcome at this time.
Okay, well, the cold, it doesn't feel like the end of April here. I'm sitting in Minot, North Dakota right now, and or as the flight attendant from United said, Minot, North Dakota.
Oops.
Yeah, it's a different way to say it. Also joining us is Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI. Hey, Tyler, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Shaun. Things are always better here in Western Quebec, so I'll just tell you that it's sun shining and 20 degrees here, birds are chirping, and life's great.
He is lying through his teeth.
Yeah.
It is raining and cold here, too.
Okay, I know I mentioned some of the tax changes were presented by Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland on Tuesday in the budget. Here to talk about specifically for sure the capital gains changes. I think that's really, I've had a lot of emails this week from the audience, not happy at all, like at all. I'm moving my farm to Montana. I've had 2 of those. Joining us is Ryan Kehrig. He is National Leader for Agriculture Tax at MNP. Hey, Ryan, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for the invitation, everyone. So,
yeah, is this like Christmas for you? Federal budget week? Do you look forward?
I think we usually have happier Christmases, but we'll go with that. So,
you know what?
No,
that's good.
There's always a lot going on this week, and you never know what you're getting into until you get there, and then you deal with what happens afterwards. So, and I'm probably fielding the same amount of phone calls you're fielding right now there, Shaun. So,
yeah. Okay. So from a tax perspective, is the changes suggested on the capital gains, is that the most significant piece in the budget this week when it comes to taxes?
The capital gain inclusion rate change is by far the largest impact, the largest tax item in the budget this week, probably the largest tax item that we've seen in years, maybe even a decade in Canada here, because it was really interesting how it came up to be this year, because every year there had historically been a lot of chatter about the capital gain inclusion rate changing, but it seemed to have died down, and it was kind of almost a sleeper going into this year's budget. And lo and behold, this is the year the inclusion rate changes. So I think it caught quite a few people in the industry, not as a out of left field, but just as a surprise that this was the year that it finally happened. So,
do you believe they talked about how few Canadians are actually impacted by this change? Do those numbers make sense to you?
It's hard to tell without having the full background story on it. I think you're referring to the 0.13% number and so forth, maybe impacted by that. I think that might be reflective of who's impacted on an annual basis, but there's going to be many, many Canadians that will be impacted in specific years, whether it be in a non-farm example through the transferring of a property or a cottage or selling a rental property or anything like that. So it is going to impact more Canadians, I believe, than what the numbers actually indicate, but maybe not on a year-to-year annual basis, but especially for those one-time life events. So
what's the biggest consequence to Canadian agriculture based on this inclusion rate change?
Oh boy. Okay. So there's a few ones to really look at there. The biggest one that I see in the short term right now is going to be those people who are considering selling their farm maybe in the next year or two, depending what their specific numbers look like here and how much lifetime capital gain exemption they have remaining. And we'll come back to that later, the lifetime capital gain exemption here. But their financial planning situation may have changed here depending on their specific numbers. They may have done the math, realize this is going to leave me with X number after tax income, and that's going to go on and fund my retirement years here. Well, those calculations may need to be revisited now to see where that leaves them, and if that mom and dad in my example are truly ready and financially secure enough to want to retire at this time, or whether or not they feel like they need to put in a few more years. So that's the short immediate impact where I think it's going to be seen. We're also going to see it, I think, a little bit in terms of the succession impacts here. We're going back to my example again, where we'd have mom and dad that want to have an X amount of dollars to fund their retirement. They plan on selling the farm to the farming kid, to the successor. They're going to gift anything over and above that number that they want to have here. Well, if mom and dad want to have X, let's just say $3 million again to fund their retirement here. If they want to have $3 million after tax, they're probably going to have to sell more share equity to their kids at capital gain rates to trigger that $3 million after tax. All mom and dad are really concerned about is how they want that $3 million. That's going to fund their retirement right there. So the kid, there's probably going to be more skimmage, I guess, for lack of a better word, of taxes being paid to the government to leave mom and dad in that position here. So it may make it a little bit harder on the incoming generation, the younger successor generation, to have to generate the cash flows to have those funds available to pay out mom and dad here. So I do see there being a tightening for the younger generation in that regard.
Okay, let's go. Tyler, you got a question for Ryan?
Yeah, I'm curious, Ryan. So the government gave everybody notice on this change, which they don't normally do with tax changes. Do you think that there's going to be some fire sales between now and the 25th of June when the change comes into effect?
That is probably the number one question I've been getting is what is the magic with the June 25th date? And I did a quick calendar searching. It's a Tuesday. It is just the most bizarre of random days. So I have no insight on that date.
Well, you missed it, right? It happens to me on my birthday. So I think this is the gift that the federal government gave me. Tax increases on your birthday. But do you think people will rush to liquidate some assets?
I do think there's going to be different type of transactions. Like the first ones where there's potential sales in process right now, there is going to be a renewed focus to try to get those closed ahead of that time. But you also have to be aware that any purchase and sale agreements, purchasers are going to know now that there is also an arbitrary deadline and tax rate. So there's going to be a little bit more negotiation perhaps, and it may not be as easy to close these type of purchase sale agreements that we see there. I think we're going to see a lot of people come and have discussions with their tax advisors. In my first scenario, like we were thinking about 2-3 years. Is there anything we can do now to maybe crystallize or lock in some of these gains ahead of time?
Yep.
That can be a very loaded question because there's a whole lot of tax legislation that's changed in the last year or two, and that'll be very client specific. And a lot of those questions are ultimately going to come down to what kind of lifetime capital gain exemption is left in this scenario. But nothing imminent. The one we'll probably see a lot of is holding companies like portfolio investments. You know, like if you have a nice healthy gain realized on Royal Bank, maybe you want to ring the register and lock in your capital gain on your Royal Bank stock at the attractive tax rates here, particularly if they're held in a holding company.
Lyndsey, you got a question?
I just want to add something.
Sorry. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. One issue I think you kind of asked what impact this might have on the ag sector. It's pretty common in a lot of our farm structures that there are holding companies set up where you move excess profits over. It's kind of like a rainy day fund. Okay, it really is what it is. It's part of the whole ownership structure. And the reason we do this is because in order to be on side of the farm rollover rules, and those are the very important ones that allow you to transfer your farm to the next generation on tax deferred, and for your capital gain use, you can't be stockpiling excess cash in the operating company. So a common tactic is to transfer this cash to a holding company, and this holding company will earn investment income. Now, a few years back, I guess a few, maybe 5 or 6 years back now, some legislation was introduced where if your holding company starts to earn more than $50,000 of passive income, think investment income, dividend income, capital gain income, the operating farm company will start to see its access to its small business deduction ground down. Okay. So no longer would they get the cheap corporate tax rates that everyone thinks of when you think of small business corporations. Well, these capital gains, they used to only be taxed 50% in that calculation. They're now going to jump up to 2/3 post June 25th. So it's going to put even more pressure to stay on side of not having more than $50,000 of this passive income. So I think a long-term effect of this is going to be as potential restrictions or grinds to farming companies' small business deductions here. So, and you think about it materially, nothing has changed. It's the same portfolio, same gain that you had the prior year, just the mechanics of how this calculation works now. So.
Yeah, that's sort of, so maybe I'll defer to Kelvin because that was, I guess, one of my questions, and I think there are many questions yet to ask and a lot that will sort of be figured out in the next couple of days. But from the perspective of, so let's say you are the succeeding generation and you are in the midst of a farm transition, to me this feels like a rather large wrench being thrown in if you are well into a plan, for sure. So how important is it, or what are some of the questions that farmers or generation should be sitting down with their accountant to talk about when it comes to this question?
Okay, so we've really focused on the capital gain inclusion rate change here, but there was a positive announced here as well, which was the bumping up of the lifetime capital gain exemption by roughly $250,000. Of course, that bump up doesn't actually come into play until the new inclusion rate comes in, so it happens at that time. But that is a little bit of a softening blow to the situation you described there, Lyndsey. So if we go to how that looks, that will actually help mom and dad on transferring more value or extracting more value from the farm on a potential tax-free basis through the use of this exemption. Because even if they didn't have any before, they are getting some more. But it's ultimately going to come down to the size of the farm that we're talking about and the payment terms, payment structure that mom and dad want to get out. If the successor generation and mom and dad agree that they want to fund this payout over 10, 15 years, there's probably some things we can do to help mitigate or soften the blow of this. But if you get situations where mom or dad are looking for a large upfront cash, that's definitely going to throw a wrench into their plans. And this is going to have a very big impact on the overall estate planning considerations for farms and going forward here. Now, if the farm is still carrying on and transferring to the next generation, the farm rollover rules still apply. Nothing has changed in that regard. But when you start to think about how perhaps non-farm siblings are sometimes handled in type of like estate planning, sometimes they're left with the whole co or other forms of assets. Well, the farm traditionally or sometimes still mostly transfers to the farming children. Well, those holding companies now have an entirely different tax burden being thrown at them here, where when mom and dad had, sat down, thought this is what they thought was fair and equitable, and they came to this. Well, those plans are going to perhaps need to be revisited now because the eventual rates that the non-farming children are going to receive on that, there's going to be less after-tax proceeds in their hands. So perhaps mom and dad are going to have to revisit what they think is fair and equitable in light of some of these considerations.
Hey, Kelvin?
I think Tyler dug up the number from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada of the average net farm net worth being just under $4 million. So we, of course, you mentioned the 0.13% of Canadian individuals being affected by this, according to the federal government. And I think it was around 12% of corporations they're anticipating will be affected. Just to give some context here, Ryan, how significant a portion of farms across Canada do you see being affected by having to pay more tax because of the changes to the capital gains?
It's really going to come down to the life cycle of where they're at. There's a lot of farms that are just continually in expansion mode or growth mode. They aren't necessarily into the whole investment picture here with the use of holding companies or not, because they're using their after-tax funds to fund the expansion of the business here. The ones that are traditionally have acquired everything they want to, they've serviced all their debt, they pretty much, or sometimes there's debt-free farms. Those are the ones that are going to have the excess cash where they're going to feel more of the impact on it. I really think it's going to hit, in terms of farms, the retiring farmers with no succession plan. That is where it's going to change the dynamics of what they're looking for in terms of that. Okay. It may also cause a little bit of there could potentially be a rush in the farmland market. I'll go through this. Is like, if somebody was considering selling their farmland, they, depending on the size, quantum, and the amount of capital gain exemption they have remaining, they have a motivation maybe to sell it before June 25th.
There is an unintended consequence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Tyler, do you have one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get to Tyler's question. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Want a product that will give you nitrogen all season long? Then you want to try Envita. Envita gets directly into the cells of the plants, and it's easy to apply, foliar or in furrow. Envita provides the flexibility you need for your farm practices. Whether you want to reduce your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain your nitrogen and increase yield, Envita fits your farm. Envita SC formulation is OMRI registered. To learn more about Envita, visit azotic.com. That's AZOTIC.com.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel. We've got Ryan Kehrig. He is the National Leader for Agriculture Tax with MNP. We got Tyler McCann from CAPI, Lyndsey Smith, and Kelvin Heppner with RealAgriculture. With full slate here today. Cattle markets are destined to rise and fall. We do know this. Make sure you're protected from unexpected price drops with livestock price insurance. Price protection for calves is available now through to June 13th. For more information, visit LPI.ca. Okay, Tyler, you had a question for Ryan.
Ryan, the theme of the budget is around fairness for every generation. I'm curious as to how much harder you think that these changes are going to make it for that next generation of farmers trying to get into farming. In my mind, it doesn't seem like it's actually, I mean, I guess it's fair because it's making that older generation pay more, but it's going to make it more expensive, tougher for the new generation trying to come in. What are your thoughts on that?
I do understand the angle that you're coming from there, Tyler, or the suggestion there, because it is going to make it potentially harder for the younger generation to buy out their mom and dad's equity in the farm. If mom and dad want this set number of dollars. Now, it's so much of this is going to be fact specific because so much of it comes down to the lifetime capital gains exemptions of mom and dad and what other options may exist. But in a scenario where the lifetime capital gain exemptions had already been used up prior during the lifetime through a variety of other means, to get mom and dad the X number of dollars that they need to, the cost to get that has now increased to the younger generation coming up. And I hope that doesn't become a barrier to entry into farming anymore. There is a succession-ish challenge looming on the horizon through lots of RBC surveys and so forth that have come out over the past couple of years. And I hope this doesn't disincentivize anybody from wanting to do it, that they're still interested in pursuing a career in agriculture because of this. So, but that is a potential fear that I have been hearing. Whether or not it actually plays out, or we'll have to wait and see over the long term.
Just shifting gears here real quick. Do you have perspective or thoughts on the small business carbon tax rebate and some of those changes?
Yeah, so when I was in the lockup room reading through that, that did catch my eye right away here. It's interesting. It's very vague on details of what this is actually going to encompass. There was no legislation to give it any enactment to this or draft legislation proposed. Really, it just indicates that corporations in Canada are going to receive a portion of a carbon tax rebate, essentially based on the number of employees that they have in the organization. There is a cap. If you have more than 500 employees, you're not eligible for this, or a variety of other caps, but it's really targeted at the small and mid-sized businesses in Canada. There was no indication on how this will interact with the existing return of farm fuel charge proceeds that farms currently receive as a tax credit when they file their corporate or individual personal tax returns here. So I was looking for that if I could see any tie-in, but the details are pretty scarce right now. So I think that's something we're going to have to wait and see how it comes out. So, but I'm sure it's welcome across other industries other than ag as well, just to see these funds being returned. I think that it has always been an issue with the program that the funds were supposed to be returned, but I'm very curious to see if this is how this impacts the ag one, if this is an add-on or if this is specifically just affect other industries. And I guess we'll have to wait and see, because I was looking for additional information. I couldn't find anything anywhere outside of the budget documents on that.
We've asked Finance Canada too, and judging by their initial response, I'm not convinced that anybody had thought of the potential for overlap here. So they said they're going to get back to us on it.
And again, I think that speaks to the fact that this is probably not a good thing, or not seen as a good thing for farmers. If they thought it was a good thing, if they thought it would deal with some of the issues around 234, they would be communicating it like that. And the fact that they aren't, either is a big oversight of a politically sensitive issue for the government, or just speaks to the reality that it's not fixing these other issues that farmers across the country have.
That's a great observation, Tyler, and I feel like I'm 50-50 on which one it is. So would love to know what other people think. I think it could go either way.
It wouldn't be the first time, though, they've done something that's beneficial to the industry where they just don't talk about it.
I feel like, well, maybe they don't care enough to toot their own horn, I guess. But I feel like if they knew, then they would. So anyway.
Possibly. Go ahead, Kelvin.
One more question for Ryan. I think it was last year's budget we had you on Real Agriculture talking about the accelerated capital cost depreciation measure. There was no word of any extension to that from what I could tell. Is that right?
There was nothing in the budget in that regard. So for corporations, I think 24, they're back to the old rules, not quite where it was back. There's so many different variations of this rule out there, but they're back to 2 times the normal amount of depreciation. So for a combine, I'll use $1 million combine example. In 23, corporation could have expensed the full $1 million combine as a deduction. In 24 here, that same combine will now be at a 30% rate. So it'll be eligible for a tax deduction of $300,000. And in the future here, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 years, it eventually will phase back to where it was way back in 2018, where that same combine would be only eligible for $150,000 of deduction. So we're on the downside of the slope from where the peak of where the immediate expensing was. For individuals or sole proprietors and individual partnerships, they still have immediate expensing here for 2024. The reason they got it 1 extra year is because they missed out on the first year when this was introduced by the government back when. So everybody had 3 years at it. So.
Ryan, to wrap up here, if you had a wish that the government would make from a tax perspective that you wish was in this budget, does something come to mind that you think would add to Canadian productivity, competitiveness, all of those things? Is there something that comes to mind?
This will be really nerdy, but we'll go for it.
Well, you are a tax nerd, so
it's fine.
Yeah. I hear it from my friends daily. Don't worry. So it's like the tax system is becoming incredibly complex. Like here we have capital gain rates that have just come in here. Your rate now depends on what entity holds the investment, what your personal income level is, because we didn't even talk about there's a personal income tax exemption where $250,000 of gains every year are taxed at the old rate. So no more do you have the certainty of a capital gain rate is taxed at a 50% inclusion rate. It's a variety of myriad of factors that come into this. And then we start talking about some of the other rules I mentioned, like the passive income and the $50,000 grind on your small business deduction. It's becoming more and more of a maze for Canadians and farms to stay on top of their tax filings every year. And unfortunately, every year right now, it seems like we have more and more complex changes, not even bringing into account where I don't want to go like the whole UHT and Bare Trust reporting and all of these things, that there's just so many new things being thrown. It's becoming harder and harder for everyone to stay in compliance and even know what it means. And I'm not sure what the overall benefit of productivity is in some of these circumstances. Like nobody enjoyed filing and filling out UHT forms and Bare Trust reporting forms only to have them scrapped at the last minute. So my one wish would be just a little bit more simplicity in the tax system, and let's just have the status quo for a while, and we'll consolidate, and if it needs to be revisited, it can be revisited later through discussions, but just less complexity, because we're tax geeks, we're tax nerds, and these things are racking our brains. I imagine what it works out, how it feels to other people in other industries as well. So
yeah, no, I don't think you're going to get any sort of argument from any of us on more simplicity. I think you've really you've hit that one home perfectly. Hey, Ryan, thanks a lot for joining us. I know you're going to go away and the panel's going to continue. So, hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Radio.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
That is Ryan Kehrig. He's the National Leader for Agricultural Tax with MNP. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of the RealAg Issues panel right after this.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, as well as a good friend, Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of taxes, and now we're going to jump into some other things that were in or out of the budget, as well as a few other topics as well. But first, I want to tell you about the answer to your above-ground nitrogen loss problem. It's pretty simple. Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Anvil's dual active ingredients deliver extended protection, visit kochag.ca. Okay, now I said at the opening of the show, I guess a question. Here's my concern. We continue to have productivity issues in Canada. That's really well documented to the rest of the G7. And we're spending more, and we're taxing more. Those are things that seem to be going in the wrong direction. And I guess the question is, are we just continuing to make ourselves more and more uncompetitive? And we're thinking about all of these programs and what the budget looks like, and we talked about the taxes, and we think about it very insular, like Canada's like the world, and there's nothing outside of the borders. But we're an exporting nation, just to give everybody a heads up, and competitiveness is a big issue. It's competitiveness for capital, competitiveness for labor. There's a lot of areas you can take that. I'm interested in the panel's reaction to that in reflection on what we heard this week from Federal Minister or Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. Tyler, you first.
So I think it's interesting, Shaun, that they seem to really like competition, but seem to be less concerned about competitiveness. So we read in the budget that the steps that they're taking to try and encourage competition in the retail sector, for example, that's something that is really important to agriculture. We hear in a section on affordable groceries, language around interoperability. It's interesting in that section, they talk about how important it is to keep the cost of farmers low so that it keeps grocery prices low. I don't think that they've ever heard maybe this reality that farmers are price takers, not price setters. But the reality is that they have this acknowledgement that it's important to keep costs for farmers low, and that's a good thing. Except, again, we haven't seen it on 234 and the carbon tax. We see some of the other changes across government that are making things more expensive. We don't seem to see this broader recognition of the benefit of a competitive, profitable, prosperous, sustainable agriculture sector. And so, again, it's hard to square the circle. You get some right fuzzy language, but at the end of the day, the brass tacks seem to be that this isn't a priority for the government.
Lyndsey, what are your thoughts?
I would add to that not even a priority. I don't even know if it occurs to them. And perhaps that's too much of a blanket statement. And I would love for anyone to give me a call and explain to me why that's wrong. But if we think about thinking about these budget items with a competitive lens, if someone were to do such a thing. I mean, we already, in our last segments, we're just talking about like how difficult this potentially will make a next generation to start farming. That it's almost like not only are we not perhaps taking seriously our need to remain competitive, we're actually actively going against our competitiveness in a lot of ways and in the policies that are being put forward. So, was there anything in this budget that really, I was like, well, that's a great idea? Not really. I mean, we don't seem, this government anyway, doesn't seem to be at all concerned about how much money they're willing to borrow and where they're going to get it from, and a ballooning deficit. And there seems to be absolutely no plan for that, and there doesn't seem to be any vision to make Canada more productive, more competitive, to actually generate that economy. Like, none at all.
But so all of that is a good summation, you two. I would add though too, I don't think I would just blame the government. I also blame Canadians. I think it's our attitude. It's just our general like
complacency. Is that what we are?
Yeah, like as if maple syrup and the waving, showing a picture of a beaver is somehow going to make us be competitive around the world, and it's the old strap that Canadian flag on the backpack and everyone's going to love you. Like it's romantic, and it's not necessarily reality. I think if they were to do a bunch of budget cuts in this budget, it would be the reaction of, if Canadians want, even on the for sure on the conservative side of the aisle, want the government to, cut the deficit, balance the budget. We should, budgets don't balance themselves. Well, just make sure those cuts aren't in things that deal with me. Make sure that it's the other people over there that are facing the budget cuts. So I don't know. I think Canadians are part of the problem. Kelvin, what are your thoughts?
I 100% agree with that. I think we don't understand what actually funds our economy when it comes to driving GDP and what actually creates new wealth and increases productivity. If you look, opening the segment, Shaun, you referred to Canada as an export-reliant nation. I think many Canadians don't realize that. And so what's driven our GDP growth, the minimal amount that there has been in the last number of years, housing, the real estate market, and government expenditures. We have a government-driven, a big part of our economy is now government-driven, and increasingly so after a budget like we saw this week. And so in many ways, this is what has gotten the Trudeau government into the political hot water that it's in right now, with a lot of people unhappy with them. And they seem to have doubled down, not have pivoted at all in terms of the direction and the tone coming out of this budget. It's another case of more government is going to help more Canadians. And I think that path we've seen, it's not working. It's not headed in the right direction.
But Shaun, this isn't just an issue for Canadians, right? Like, I mean, I guess we're all Canadians, but agriculture itself as a sector has a lot of these challenges. I think agriculture has become very transactional. I think if you look at in the policy world, kind of where I spend my day to day, it isn't about kind of what's the strategic direction we're going in. If you look at the budget asks that groups put into the federal government coming into it, it's what's this little thing here? What's this little thing there? It is about, a lot of it is about what do you spend more money? And now I don't think anybody was asking for big investments, but a lot of it is about investments from the government. And we have a hard time thinking about how do we get out of this transactional, do this for me, do that for me, fix my little problem here, and think about actually what we need to think about is the direction we're going in. And 234 in the carbon tax has got a lot of attention, but there's a lot of bigger issues that have a far bigger impact on the sector that don't get talked about every day. And sometimes those impacts are longer term, not something immediate you see on your bill that you get for natural gas every year, but the impact is pretty significant, and we don't think about them. And so I think that makes it easier for the government to come out with a budget that barely mentions agriculture, a budget that's very transactional, a budget that's a little things for a lot of people rather than anything meaningful for any one sector.
Well, Kelvin said on the show Wednesday when he joined me, he thought this budget maybe mentioned agriculture the least amount of all of your time covering budgets, Kelvin. You still holding to that?
Yeah, I think so. There are some broader policy changes like the capital gains change that apply to agriculture, but in terms of specific agricultural type programming, I don't know, Tyler, were you surprised OFCAF, the On-Farm Climate Action Fund, Sustainable Ag Strategy, the Ag Clean Technology Program, some of these programs that have really been focused on and highlighted in the last 3, 4, 5 budgets, there was no mention of these programs. And I don't know, is that something that we should read? Is that a message from government in terms of a shift in priorities on the agriculture front?
So we've talked about the sustainable ag strategy in the past, so I think it's interesting to see where it goes. They put the What We Heard report out in between Christmas and New Year's. Now we see a budget that makes no reference to it. So I don't know if that speaks to the priority of it.
Well, think about the Canada Grain Act. That didn't get mentioned either. So,
and the mentions that are there, I mean, we talked about interoperability earlier. It's a section on affordable groceries. And so I think that's also kind of interesting to kind of how you square that circle about when it does talk about agriculture. It talks about it in a context that we don't talk about it in.
And it's already the subject of a bill in the Senate.
Yeah.
Why are we launching consultations again, or saying we're going to launch consultations?
Because that's what we do. We just keep consulting.
Wait, is this the royal we, or is this federal government?
This is Canada.
I do not want to.
No. This is Canada.
I don't want to be in that royal
we. We just keep on consulting. We need to talk about it. We need to build consensus. We need to see how everybody feels about it. Not just the people that are directly impacted. We need to talk to some off yonder activist group that has nothing to do with what we're talking about to get their perspective to make sure that we haven't offended anybody.
But Sean, I think that there's this trap we fall into. It's become this political thing about Canada's broken, right? I think that's wrong. I think that the country isn't broken yet, although if you look at, we've got a leader in Quebec talking about another referendum. Maybe that will actually break the country. I think it's the government of Canada, right? I mean, you talk about the royal we, but it's the government of Canada that consults and does nothing. It's the government of Canada that struggles to deliver services to the country. It's the government of Canada that's seen significant employment. The number of public servants has shot up, and yet the results to Canadians are worse. I reject the premise that Canada's broken. I'm fully willing to buy into a discussion about the government of Canada is broken instead.
We need, I don't know how many panels we have, all of us have participated in the last 3 years in regards to unlocking the potential of Canada and agriculture. And oh my goodness, I think it feels like we just lost the keys some days. Okay. We got to take a break. I got to take a deep breath. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground. We are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann of CAPI, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, and me, your host, Shaun Haney. This is brought to you by the new Oxbow cereal broadleaf herbicide from New Farm. Oxbow is powered by Duplasm technology that is workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds in wheat and barley. Hate that kochia. Anything that kills kochia, I'm in favor of, Lyndsey. I'm telling you.
Same.
Yeah. Oh, hey, we never even, I totally forgot about it. Tyler is a huge Swiftie. Huge.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah, he has her picture tattooed on his left arm.
Lot of songs came out today, Sean. Not sure that they're some of her best work, though.
Oh.
But 2 albums, you guys. 2.
Yeah. 2 albums out today.
But maybe, Lyndsey, though, again, quantity over quality. You don't think?
I haven't got through them all yet. I've been working. Tyler was up at 2 a.m. listening to the second album.
I'm a little worried that it's going to depress my 11-year-old daughter again. But,
The writing is quite fantastic from what I've heard so far. So I've listened to a few of them, and she is a very talented songwriter.
Okay, but like
there's some hurting on the bottle going on. Got to tell you.
Yeah.
Woo. Anyway,
Okay.
Yeah. She's great. She's amazing.
Okay.
Sorry, Shaun. I know she's not your favorite.
Well, no.
Too
She's
many
great.
minutes.
No. She is great. She's great. I'm just. It's not my genre.
Mm-hmm.
Tell you, a lot more people like Taylor Swift than the Toronto Blue Jays, Shaun.
Yeah, we could have swept the Yankees. That was uncomfortable. What happened there at the end? So, hey, pretty good series, Blue Jay fans. You bunch of negative bunch. Yeah. We look pretty good. We look like a baseball team. Varsho coming together. Like
3 series wins in a row.
Yes. These negative train that all these Blue Jay fans are. It's ridiculous. Okay, let's get to budget. One of the things that stuck out, Kelvin, you wrote a story on this, is RealAg Canada, which is the lobby firm, or is the lobby organization for the biofuel industry in Canada. It's our version of the RFA. Concern in terms of ethanol not being included in some of that $750 million plus funding. What happened here?
Yeah, so $776 million was announced in the budget, or retooled in the budget, for a clean fuels fund to drive production of, and this is quoting the budget, renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and renewable natural gas. Ethanol was notably not mentioned, and so Renewable Industries Canada has come out with a statement saying they have serious concern over this apparent exclusion of ethanol among the supported biofuel categories. And they say that this would be a major setback for ethanol production in Canada, especially in southern Ontario, and the demand and that creates for corn grown in southern Ontario. There's also the issue again of competitiveness in Canada versus the U.S. market, where of course the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, incentivizes biofuel production, including ethanol, and so there's concern that this will undermine Canada's biofuel industry, and of course ethanol is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I almost wonder here if the government's making a decision that, we want to pursue renewable diesel. It's got a better, it's got a better story, or SAF, and we're just going to import the ethanol. Canada's the largest purchaser of U.S. ethanol, so we're a big time customer. So
yeah, we're already behind on production domestically.
Yeah, absolutely. Lyndsey, how does this sit with you?
Well, I mean, depending on how this actually shakes out, and that, I guess, remains to be seen. I think it's important that, this has been flagged of we need more information here. So, and certainly for Ontario growers, it would be a huge concern should ethanol sort of fall off the radar or off the focus or fall into, the not so wanted category. It's a pretty big driver for the Ontario corn market. Substantially so.
Ontario is mentioned by RealAg Canada, but Manitoba, it's also a significant
on
the corn acres
on the wheat side.
Well.
Yeah, got a story coming out here. I got to get to it next week about how Canadian farmers feel about the CFR and biofuel policy. Pretty neutral bunch, Canadian farmers, when it comes to that policy impacting their farms. I got to get to this. This week there was the Plant Forward conference. Toronto, I think it was in Toronto. Right. Yeah. And the AFC Deputy Minister, Stephanie Beck, was one of the people that was on stage. And Tyler, she made a comment that I received numerous texts about, saying that Canada doesn't, and I'm paraphrasing, this isn't a direct quote, but Canada doesn't need to produce more food. We just need to waste less. What is she? That seems like, I didn't know that was actually a decision.
And I didn't know either. And I think that's probably would come as news to a lot of farmers that are spending a lot of money on seed and fertilizer and chemistries this year to be more productive and to produce more food, that they don't need to do that. I think wasting less food is really important. The opportunity to, help drive costs down, improve sustainability, lower our environmental footprint, all that is really good stuff. Needs to get more attention than it does. But it's news to me that we've made a decision in this country not to produce more food, that we don't need to produce more food. And I think it's really unfortunate. And it may speak to some of kind of a broader sense of what we see out of the federal government today. I mean, Shaun, Canada's got one of the best environmental footprints for most of the commodities we produce. Our beef has got one of the lowest environmental footprints. Our canola, our wheat has got some of the lowest environmental footprints. Arguably, if we wanted to help reduce the impact of climate change around the world, we should be arguing to produce more food, and we should be trying to compete against countries like Brazil, Indonesia, other places that have, that have to convert land into production in ways that we don't. I think it's just unfortunate, and I hope that maybe there was some misspeaking and some miscommunication. But if you look at some of the things that have come out, around fertilizer, around the sustainable ag strategy, maybe this does reflect the reality of agriculture and agri-food Canada's thinking today.
Yeah, and I guess, Kelvin, it gets back to your comment. We just maybe don't realize how important exports are to our actual overall economy.
Yeah, and Canada exists in this global world where there are people in many other countries that are hungry. We're not in a world where we have excess food. Certainly, we can work on reducing waste, and those two things can happen at the same time. We can work on increasing production, being more productive, and at the same time being more efficient and reducing the amount of waste. So, yeah, I'm not sure where this thinking comes from, and I'm with Tyler in terms of hoping that there's a mistake in the communication here somewhere.
But there may not be, right? And again, I think if you look at the decisions that the government's making, if you look at the priorities that are there, I think sometimes we get caught up in agriculture that these are all political issues. I think that there's a temptation to just blame it on the Liberals. Things are going to be better when the Conservatives get into power. And this may be some insight into the fact that, no, it's not just a political issue. It is a broader issue inside the federal civil service. And it is something that we need to be prepared. That's part of a long battle that the sector is going to face.
And if that is the case, that also explains how some of the populist policies, anti-trade policies we're seeing around the world, like that this is maybe a broader trend of people not understanding basic economics and basic trade, and how that has helped improve lives of millions, billions of people around the world.
Well, yeah, where have increased tariffs ever been good for agriculture? Mm-hmm. Right?
And again, I think we often talk about it in the economic context, but if we want to talk about it in the context that relates more to this federal government, from a sustainability perspective, Canada producing more food is a good thing. That is something that we should wear as a badge of honor. And if we're not connecting those dots, and if the federal government's not connecting those dots, I think that's an issue.
Yeah. I think, and I know we're short on time, but I think part of perhaps what could be one of those missing pieces is exactly this conversation that, we provide meals to other people around the world. It is food. That is what we're growing, whether it's, wheat or lentils or whatever those things are. Like, this is food. It just may not be, a meal for a Canadian, but as Kelvin alluded to, this is millions of meals and billions of meals around the world that we produce. And to Tyler's point, we can do it in a way that we actually do take care of our environment. So we should be doing more of it and recognizing that it's not just, the food that you eat or you pick up at the grocery store for your own family. We produce those same ingredients and that same food around the world, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, well,
it's billions of dollars in tax revenue that pays for healthcare and school and education and social programs and everything.
All the things that we enjoy.
Announced in every budget.
It does make me wonder. We talk all the time about how the agricultural, the agriculture department may be somewhat detached or not as seem to be deemed as important. Where does the trade ministry sit when you hear some of these comments? If I was ministering, I'd be making a phone call saying, say what? Anyway. Okay.
Minister Ng is too busy with her 17 portfolio.
It's getting better. They've reduced them. No,
it's true.
It is getting better. We didn't get to the election in India. I'm sorry about that, Kelvin. I know that was something you wanted to bring up, and
starts today.
Starts today. It's a long process. It goes till like June or something like that?
I think it's 6 weeks.
Okay. And the big U.S. trade mission into India this week as well. So Canada, some of those crops we're competing on, such as things like apples and pulse crops into India.
Meanwhile, India's prime minister is celebrating 1 billion tons of coal production in the country.
There you go. Hey, Tyler, have yourself a great weekend.
Thanks, Shaun.
Lyndsey and Kelvin, all the best. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Go Leafs.
Oh, Lord.
More
okay.
importantly, go shovel square dance team that's competing at a square dance competition this weekend. That's where the real action's at.
Square dancing. Okay. Well, you can hear lots. Hey, there's lots of opportunity for square dancing and polka here on Rural Radio. Just tune in on the weekend. Molly B, big celebrity. Okay, if you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Have yourselves a great weekend. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Coragen Max Insecticide from FMC. When you need to protect your crops from damaging insects, Coragen Max Insecticide delivers fast, selective, extended control of grasshoppers, Bertha armyworms, diamondback moth, cutworms, and more. Ask your retailer today.